Rain, cold and relentless, plastered strands of hair to Elara's face, stinging her eyes as she stumbled through the ancient woods. The scent of pine and damp earth was usually a comfort, a familiar embrace in her solitary world, but tonight it was laced with something metallic, something sharp and wrong. A primal fear, cold as the rain, clutched at her throat. She was the village healer, known for her gentle touch and knowledge of herbs, but nothing in her quiet life had prepared her for this. If you've ever wondered what happens when the most vulnerable among us is thrust into a world of ancient secrets and unimaginable power, compelled by a single act of desperate kindness, then stay with this story. What she found huddled beneath the dripping boughs of an ancient oak was a shape of pain, a fallen creature bleeding into the saturated soil. It wasn't an animal caught in a snare, though its pained whimpers were animalistic. It was humanoid, wrapped in tattered, dark clothing, unnaturally still save for the shallow, ragged breaths that misted in the cold air. A gasp escaped her lips, swallowed by the storm's roar. She knew the legends, whispered in hushed tones around village fires, tales of creatures that shunned the sun, beings of myth and terror. This, lying broken before her, felt like a legend torn violently into her reality. Its skin was pale, too pale, stretched taut over sharp bones. A dark, viscous pool spread beneath it. Too much blood, seeping away life she instinctively felt shouldn't be so easily lost. The wound was a terrible gash across its chest, pulsing weakly. Fear warred with the healer's impulse, the ingrained need to mend what was broken. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back to the flickering safety of Oakhaven's distant lights, to forget this nightmare. But another, deeper voice, the quiet, persistent beat of her own heart, urged her forward. This was suffering, and suffering, regardless of its vessel, demanded aid. Her hands, trained to handle delicate leaves and apply soothing poultices, hovered uncertainly. The air around the creature felt colder, imbued with an unnerving stillness that defied the raging storm. Hesitantly, she knelt, her knees sinking into the mud. She could feel the faint warmth emanating from the wound, the terrible reality of the injury. Her small bag of herbs felt pathetically inadequate against this. This wasn't a broken bone or a fever she could break with willow bark. This was something fundamental torn apart. She had no needle, no thread for such a gruesome cut, and even if she did, the blood loss was critical. Desperation was a sharp, cold point in her chest. She looked from the wound to the creature's face, partially obscured by wet, dark hair. It was a face of stark, almost unnatural beauty, even in its current state of agony, etched with a weary nobility that shouldn't belong to something so reviled. Its lips were parted, revealing something she didn't want to see, something that confirmed the terrifying whisperings of the legends. A vampire, a creature of night, of death, of hunger. Her people feared them, hunted them, spoke of them as monsters without souls. And here one lay, dying, at her feet. The storm seemed to intensify, mirroring the tempest in her own mind. To help this thing was madness. It was betrayal of everything her village stood for, of the safety they clung to in their isolated valley. It was risking her own life. For what? For a monster? But the heaving chest, the ragged breaths, they were the language of life struggling against extinction, a language her healer's heart understood regardless of species. She thought of the times Oakhaven had needed her, the grateful smiles of mothers whose children she'd nursed back from the brink, the quiet relief of elders whose aches she'd eased. That was her purpose. And could she stand by and watch anything bleed to death in the rain if there was a chance, however small, to stop it? Her gaze fell upon her own hand, scraped raw from her scramble through the undergrowth. A small cut bled sluggishly on her palm. An insane idea, born of sheer panic and a desperate lack of alternatives, bloomed in her mind, hot and sharp, cutting through the cold fog of fear. It was forbidden, dangerous, the stuff of the darkest tales. Yet, the creature needed blood, life force, something to stem the terrible tide flowing out of it. She had nothing else. In that moment, under the ancient oak, Bathed in the relentless rain, Elara made a choice that defied logic, fear, and generations of ingrained lore. A choice driven by a desperate, improbable compassion. Her hand trembled, not from cold, but from the enormity of the act she was contemplating. She didn't know if it would help, if it would harm, or if it would simply mark her for the same fate. But the alternative, letting this life, however monstrous it was said to be, simply ebb away into the mud, felt wrong. Profoundly, unforgivably wrong. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she pressed her bleeding palm against the creature's parched, cool lips. The metallic tang of her own blood mixed with the rain. She felt a flicker of movement, a weak responsiveness against her skin. A low sound, not a whimper now, but something else, a soft, guttural acknowledgement, escaped the creature's throat. She held her breath, bracing herself for teeth, for pain, for the monstrous transformation the legends promised when a vampire fed. Instead, she felt only a gentle suction, weak, hesitant, almost grateful. The feeling was bizarrely intimate, a strange connection forged in the heart of the storm between rescuer and rescued, predator and prey, healer and the source of deepest fear. She knelt there, palm pressed to lips she had believed were only for biting, feeling the slow, tentative draw of her own lifeblood offering a fragile bridge back from the brink. The rain washed over her, blurring the world, leaving only the sensation of her blood, the creature's faint warmth, and the terrifying, exhilarating weight of a secret born in darkness and rain. This act, born of a simple, desperate mercy, was not merely a moment of forbidden aid. It was the first drop in a river that would sweep her away from the quiet shores of her known life, carrying her towards an ancient prophecy, towards a destiny intertwined with ruin and, impossibly, with love. The wounded vampire stirred beneath her touch, its eyes, previously closed in pain, fluttered open, revealing depths she couldn't yet comprehend, reflecting the storm-racked sky and the dawning horror and wonder in her own eyes. The creature's eyes, when they fully opened, were not the soulless voids of the legends. They were a striking, deep amber, intelligent and ancient, filled with a pain that mirrored the wound in its chest, but also a dawning recognition, a flicker of surprise that softened the stark lines of its face. Elara scrambled back instinctively, pulling her hand away as the suction ceased. Her palm stung, but the bleeding had slowed, a small, almost insignificant wound compared to the gaping tear on the creature's chest. It watched her, its gaze steady despite its obvious weakness. The silence between them, now that the immediate crisis of bleeding was momentarily eased, felt heavier than the storm itself. It wasn't a silence of peace, but of two vastly different worlds colliding under the most improbable circumstances. Why? The voice was a low rasp, surprisingly soft, yet imbued with a resonance that vibrated in the air. It was feminine, confirming Elara's earlier intuition about the shape beneath the cloak.
Why?
The question hung unanswered between them. Elara didn't have a clean, simple answer. It wasn't logic, not duty, certainly not courage in the traditional sense. It was something akin to instinct, the same instinct that made a bird mend a broken wing, or a deer lick its wound. It was the core drive of a healer, to alleviate suffering. You were hurt," Elara stammered, her voice thin against the wind. "You were dying." The vampire's lips, still faintly stained with Elara's blood, curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Few would offer aid to one like me. Fewer still this." It gestured weakly towards Elara's hand, then its own chest. The wound was still horrifying, but the desperate, gushing flow had slowed to a sluggish seep. It looked at Elara with an intensity that made her feel utterly exposed, as if her thoughts and fears were laid bare. There was no hunger in those eyes, not the predatory gaze she'd feared, but a piercing curiosity. "You are different." The words were a statement, not a question. Elara, still kneeling in the mud, felt a rush of conflicting emotions, terror, confusion, a strange, bewildering pity. I am Elara, the village healer. I couldn't just leave you." The vampire nodded slowly, a small movement that seemed to cost it immense effort. Elara, it repeated, the name sounding foreign yet somehow significant on its tongue. I am Lyraan. Lyraan. The name felt ancient, like something whispered by the wind through the oldest trees. Elara realized the rain had begun to subside, softening to a drizzle. The gray pre-dawn light was beginning to filter through the thick canopy. Lyraan flinched almost imperceptibly as the light touched her face. The sun. I must shelter, Lyraan murmured, her voice growing weaker again. Hiding a wounded vampire in the woods wasn't sustainable. It was suicidal. Elara's mind raced. The village. Oakhaven. Her home. To bring this creature, there was unthinkable. They feared anything that wasn't them, anything that came from the shadowed world beyond their valley. She was already viewed with a certain distance, the orphaned girl who talked to plants and brewed strange concoctions. Bringing a vampire home would be her undoing, and potentially the village's. But leaving Lyraan here, vulnerable to the dawning sun, to any passing hunter or, worse, agents of the order that sometimes patrolled these borders seeking out anomalies, felt equally impossible after what she had done. There's an old root cellar, Elara said hesitantly, the words tumbling out before she could truly consider the madness of them. Beyond the last fields. Abandoned. It's dark. It's hidden. Lyraan's gaze sharpened, assessing Elara, perhaps assessing the risk. You would risk so much for me? I made a choice, Elara said, her voice gaining a fragile strength. I cannot unmake it. And you're still hurt. The decision solidified between them, silent and binding. Helped by Elara, Lyraan, with immense difficulty, pushed herself up, leaning heavily on the ancient oak. Every movement was agony. Elara helped support her, feeling the unnatural cold radiate from Lyraan's body, the unsettling stillness beneath her tattered cloak. The journey to the root cellar was slow, arduous, a blur of mud, tangled roots, and the constant fear of being seen. Elara guided Lyraan with surprising strength, fueled by the urgent need to get her to safety before the sun fully rose. They moved like shadows themselves, two figures bound by an impossible secret, traversing the liminal space between the wild woods and the edge of the cultivated fields, the boundary of Elara's known world. As they neared the edge of the tree line, the faint smoke from village hearths became visible, a stark contrast to the cold, silent presence beside her. The scent of wood smoke, usually comforting, now felt heavy with the weight of her deception. Oakhaven wasn't large. Everyone knew everyone. Secrets were like stones dropped in a still pond, the ripples inevitably reaching every shore. Elara thought of Elder Maeve, her face a roadmap of Oakhaven's history, her eyes sharp with suspicion for anything new or strange. She thought of Thomas, the miller's son, whose fever she'd broken last spring, his gratitude warring with the cautious distance the villagers kept from her. Flashback. She saw herself as a child, small and alone after the sickness took her parents, clutching a bundle of her mother's dried herbs, the village council debating her fate. It was Maeve who reluctantly agreed she could stay, live in the abandoned cottage, but only if she proved useful. Her knowledge of healing, passed down from her mother, had been her fragile anchor, her only claim to belonging in a place that tolerated, but never fully embraced, her. That lingering sense of being on the outside made this impossible act of bringing Lyraan close feel both terrifyingly reckless and strangely right. Like two outsiders finding refuge together. They reached the root cellar just as the first direct rays of sun pierced the canopy. It was an old, forgotten structure, half buried in the earth, its wooden door warped and covered in moss. Inside, it was damp, musty, and blessedly dark. Elara helped Lyraan inside, the air thick with the smell of decaying earth and old secrets. Lyraan sank to the floor, her strength completely gone. The faint light filtering through the cracks in the door seemed to cause her visible discomfort. Water, Lyraan rasped. Elara fumbled for the water skin she always carried. Lyraan drank deeply, though it seemed to offer little relief. Elara looked at the wound again. It had stopped bleeding, but it was still a terrible, raw thing. She needed bandages, clean water to wash it, soothing herbs. She couldn't treat this with what little she had left from her walk. She had to go back to the village. Had to risk it. "I will return," Elara said, her voice steadier now that the immediate danger was past. "I will bring supplies." Lyraan reached out a hand, her fingers cool against Elara's wrist. The touch sent a jolt through Elara, a strange mix of apprehension and something else she couldn't name. "Elara," Lyraan said, her amber eyes holding hers. "You have given me a temporary reprieve. Understand this is no small thing. But my kind, we are hunted. You cannot reveal my presence. Not to anyone. The danger is not just to me. It will extend to you. And to your village." The warning was clear, stark, and terrifying. Elara felt the full weight of her decision press down on her. She hadn't just saved a life. She had tied herself to a creature of legend, inviting unknown dangers to her doorstep. "I understand," Elara whispered, though she knew she only understood the smallest part of it. She was the orphaned healer who had offered blood to a vampire. Her quiet life was over. The sun was fully risen outside the root cellar now, casting dappled patterns through the trees. Inside, the darkness held, sheltering their impossible secret. Elara knew she had to leave, to gather supplies, to weave a convincing tale for her absence. But as she stood there, looking at the wounded, powerful, yet vulnerable being she had helped, she felt a flicker of something beyond fear. A strange sense of destiny, of having stepped onto a path she could never leave, a path leading into shadows far deeper and more complex than she had ever imagined. The root cellar, a place of decay and forgetfulness, had become the birthplace of a secret that would change everything. Returning to Oakhaven after the sunrise was a trial in itself. Elara moved cautiously, her senses heightened, acutely aware of every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves. The familiar path felt alien, charged with the weight of her secret. She rehearsed explanations in her mind. She'd gone searching for a rare herb. She'd gotten lost in the storm. None of them felt convincing enough, not to the sharp eyes of the villagers, especially Elder Maeve. As she approached the first cottages, smoke curled lazily from chimneys, the comforting scent of breakfast cooking filling the air. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard. It was the picture of peaceful, mundane life, a stark contrast to the shadowed reality she had just left. She saw Thomas mending a fence near his cottage. He waved, a hesitant, friendly gesture. She managed a weak smile in return, her heart pounding with the fear he might notice the mud on her clothes, the exhaustion etched on her face, the lingering scent of pine, and something wilder, darker. She went straight to her small cottage, her sanctuary filled with the dry rustle of herbs and the clean scent of her liniments. Inside, she quickly shed her muddy outer layer, her hands trembling. She gathered clean cloths, antiseptic poultices made from yarrow, a vial of pain-easing tincture she kept for severe injuries. She hesitated by the small, locked box where she kept a few precious items inherited from her mother, among them a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a symbol of protection and safe passage. She tucked it into her pocket, a small, foolish comfort. Her greatest need was blood. Not just a few drops from a scraped palm, but something more substantial, something that could truly aid in the healing of a creature like Lyraan. The thought was both repellent and morbidly fascinating. She knew the legends spoke of vampires needing living blood to heal, to regain strength. Her own blood, offered in desperation, had been a temporary measure. To offer more, deliberately, was to invite a connection she didn't understand, a dependency she couldn't fathom. But Lyraan was weak, dangerously weak, and Elara had made a commitment. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. Her eyes were wide, a stranger's eyes in a familiar face. Could she do this? Could she purposefully draw her own blood, not for a ritual, not for injury, but to feed a vampire? It felt like stepping across an invisible threshold, leaving behind the person she was, the healer who mended with herbs and clean water, for something else entirely. She made her decision with a quiet resolve. She found a clean, sharp knife and a small, glass vial. It was a simple act, drawing blood from a vein in her arm, but it felt weighted with immense significance. The sight of her own blood filling the vial was strangely mesmerizing. It was her life, her essence, offered up. This wasn't just healing anymore. This was sacrifice.
And it was terrifying.
Carefully concealing the vial and the other supplies in a woven basket, Elara ventured out again. She offered a brief, vague explanation to Thomas when he asked, mentioning a long search for a specific herb. His eyes, though friendly, held a flicker of the village's inherent caution towards her. She felt their collective gaze on her back as she walked towards the edge of the fields, a palpable pressure of suspicion and unspoken questions. Once she reached the tree line, she moved faster, her pace driven by urgency and fear. She found the root cellar, half hidden by ferns and encroaching vines. The air inside was still, heavy. Lyraan was as Elara had left her, slumped against the damp earth, breathing shallowly. She looked even paler in the dim light filtering through the cracks. Elara knelt beside her. "I brought supplies," she said softly. Lyraan's eyes opened, fixing on the basket. "And something else." Elara produced the vial of her own blood. Lyraan's gaze shifted to the vial, then back to Elara's face, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her features. It wasn't predatory hunger, but a complex mix of need, surprise, and perhaps reluctance. "You would again?" Lyraan asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You are aware of the implications?" Elara hesitated. "I know it's unnatural, dangerous, but you need strength. My herbs can help the wound close, but not what you are." She held out the vial. "This is all I could think of." Lyraan looked at the vial for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed Elara's, and again, that strange jolt passed between them, stronger this time, like two tuning forks resonating. Lyraan brought the vial to her lips and drank, her eyes closed. Elara watched, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. The act felt profoundly intimate, a forbidden exchange of life force. When Lyraan finished, she opened her eyes. A faint flush had returned to her cheeks, a subtle difference in the quality of her presence. She seemed marginally stronger. "Your blood, it is potent," Lyraan said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "More so than it should be for a human." Elara frowned. "Potent?"
"I don't understand."
"Later," Lyraan said, her voice firmer now. "First, the wound." Elara set about cleaning and binding the gash on Lyraan's chest, her healer's hands working with practiced efficiency despite the unsettling nature of her patient. Lyraan remained still, watching Elara with that intense, knowing gaze. There was a vulnerability in Lyraan now, a dependency on Elara that was both frightening and strangely disarming. This wasn't the terrifying monster of the legends. This was a wounded being, accepting aid from the most unlikely source. As Elara worked, a new dynamic settled between them. The initial shock and desperation gave way to a quiet, focused purpose. Elara was the healer, Lyraan the patient. But beneath that surface, something else was forming, a tentative bridge across the vast chasm between their worlds, built on an act of impossible mercy and a shared secret. The air in the root cellar no longer felt just damp and musty. It felt charged, expectant, holding its breath for what their forbidden connection might unleash. Days blurred into a routine born of secrecy and necessity. Elara would rise before dawn, perform her minimal duties in the village to avoid suspicion, and then, basket in hand, make her way to the root cellar. She brought fresh water, herbal poultices, and, with increasing regularity, small vials of her own blood. Each time she offered it, she felt a subtle shift within herself, a strange resonance with Lyraan that deepened with every shared drop. Lyraan's physical wounds healed with unnatural speed, aided both by Elara's skills and the unique vitality Lyraan drew from Elara's blood. But her true strength, the ancient power that pulsed beneath her skin, returned more slowly. During these hidden hours, as Lyraan recovered in the darkness, she began to speak. Not of her past immediately, but of the world beyond Oakhaven, a world Elara had only ever heard of in fearful whispers. Lyraan spoke of cities bathed in artificial light, of vast forests untouched by human hands, of ancient conflicts and hidden histories. She spoke of her kind, not as soulless monsters, but as beings bound by ancient laws, some noble, some cruel. And she spoke of the Order, a vast, powerful organization that hunted her kind, seeking to control or eradicate them, driven by dogma and a chilling efficiency. Lyraan's words painted a picture of a world far more complex and dangerous than Elara had ever imagined, a world that felt disturbingly close now that Lyraan was hidden on its very edge. Lyraan also began to teach Elara. Not formal lessons, but observations, ways of seeing and sensing the world that were entirely new to Elara. "Listen to the silence, Elara," Lyraan would whisper, her eyes closed. Not just the absence of noise, but the life within it. The beetles moving underground, the faint vibration of roots growing, the distant flight of a bird. Elara, accustomed to listening for the rustle of leaves or the call of an animal, found herself tuning into a deeper frequency, a subtle symphony of life she had never perceived before. "Feel the air currents," Lyraan instructed. "Not just the wind on your skin, but the way it shifts around obstacles. Carry sense, the faint warmth rising from living things." Elara practiced, closing her eyes, extending her senses. She began to feel the presence of small creatures hidden in the undergrowth, the direction of the nearest stream, the path a deer had taken hours ago. It was like gaining new eyes, new ears, new ways of interacting with the environment. It was Lyraan, the creature of night, teaching her to truly see the day. Flashback. Elara remembered trying to learn tracking from one of the village hunters after her parents died. Feeling clumsy and inadequate, her senses dulled compared to his ingrained knowledge. She had given up, retreating to her herbs and the quiet predictability of her healing work. Now, under Lyraan's guidance, she felt a dormant part of herself awakening, a sharpness of perception she hadn't known she lacked. Lyraan also taught her about movement. "Do not move against the forest, but with it," Lyraan advised, demonstrating with small, fluid shifts of her body, even in her weakened state. "Become part of the shadows, part of the rustling leaves. Blur your edges." Elara, who had always moved with the practical steps of a villager, began to learn a new kind of locomotion, light and silent, dissolving into the background. This guidance wasn't just about practical skills, it felt deeper, more profound. Lyraan wasn't just teaching her to survive, she was teaching her a different way of being. A way that felt strangely familiar, as if she were remembering something she had forgotten. As Lyraan grew stronger, the dynamic shifted again. The patient became the mentor, the rescuer the student. Elara found herself relying on Lyraan's insights, trusting her perception of the world. Their conversations, initially hesitant and brief, became longer, more philosophical. They spoke of loneliness, of being different, of the weight of secrets. Elara, who had always felt a quiet solitude in Oakhaven, found a strange kinship with this ancient, exiled being. Lyraan, in turn, seemed to find something in Elara, something beyond the blood she offered. A genuine curiosity, a quiet strength, a deep well of empathy. There was a growing respect, a quiet understanding that transcended the vast differences between them. Meanwhile, back in the village, the subtle shifts in Elara's routine did not go unnoticed. Elder Maeve's questions became more pointed. "You spend much time in the woods these days, Elara. More than collecting herbs requires." Thomas, though still friendly, sometimes looked at her with a puzzled expression. Elara maintained her facade, but the pressure was building. She felt stretched thin between her two worlds, the familiar, yet cautious, embrace of Oakhaven and the hidden, dangerous reality she shared with Lyraan. One evening, as dusk settled and Elara prepared to leave the root cellar, Lyraan stopped her. "The air tastes different tonight, Elara," she said, her amber eyes distant. There is metal and fear on the wind. They are near.
They.
Elara asked, her heart tightening. The Order, Lyraan confirmed, her voice low and serious. Or those who hunt for them. They're searching. Perhaps drawn by traces I left. Or perhaps they know more than I wish. They will come looking. The words sent a chill down Elara's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. The abstract threat Lyraan had spoken of was suddenly concrete, terrifyingly close. Elara hadn't just saved a life. She had drawn the attention of powerful, dangerous forces to her doorstep. Forces that would not hesitate to harm anyone associated with Lyraan, including the small, unsuspecting village of Oakhaven. The time for quiet hiding was over. The knowledge Lyraan had imparted, the heightened senses, the silent movement, they were no longer just lessons in perception. They were tools for survival. Their shared secret was about to collide violently with the world, and Elara, the simple village healer, was standing directly in its path. The transformation had begun not when she gave her blood, but in the quiet lessons that followed, in the deepening bond, in the chilling realization that her life was now irrevocably bound to Lyraan's and to the ancient conflict that hunted them both. The chilling certainty in Lyraan's voice left no room for doubt. The hunters were close. Elara returned to her cottage that night, but sleep offered no respite. Every rustle of leaves, every distant owl's call, sounded like approaching footsteps. The air, as Lyraan had said, felt thick with unspoken threat. She spent the next day in a state of heightened alert, performing her village duties mechanically, her senses stretched thin, listening, watching. She noticed subtle signs she would have missed before Lyraan's guidance. Crows circling ominously towards the eastern ridge, a faint, unnatural stillness among the forest animals near the valley's entrance, a few unfamiliar faces among the merchants in the small market square, faces that held a cold, calculating intensity. They were here. They were searching. The pressure on Elara intensified, not just from the external threat, but from the internal conflict tearing at her. She was the healer of Oakhaven, sworn to protect its people. But her secret, her connection to Lyraan, put them all at risk. Could she protect the village without exposing Lyraan? Could she protect Lyraan without endangering the village? This wasn't just a test of her newfound abilities. It was a profound moral reckoning. That evening, she went to the root cellar again, not with supplies for healing, but with a heavy heart and a grim determination. She told Lyraan what she had seen, the subtle signs, the strangers in the market. Lyraan listened, her amber eyes reflecting the faint light from Elara's lantern, her face grim. "They are efficient," Lyraan said softly. "They follow the threads, no matter how fine. My presence here is a danger to you and to your people. I must move on." The words, though expected, struck Elara with surprising force. The thought of Lyraan leaving, of severing the strange, intense bond that had formed between them, left her feeling suddenly adrift, alone again. Yet she knew Lyraan was right. "Where will you go?" Elara asked, her voice quiet. Lyraan gave a faint, weary shrug. "Into the deeper wilds, where the sun is a legend and shadows are kin. It is where I belong." But something in Lyraan's gaze held a flicker of reluctance, a hint that perhaps the ancient exile had found a fragile, unexpected refuge in this damp earth cellar and the quiet presence of the human healer. "They will search for you," Elara said. "They will search here, near the village. If they find anything, any trace," Lyraan nodded. "That is the risk. And it is my risk alone to bear." But Elara knew that wasn't true. The risk was hers, too. It was Oakhaven's risk. Flashback. She saw her parents' faces, blurred by memory and the cruel swiftness of the sickness that took them. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, the inability of her mother's healing knowledge, powerful as it was, to save them from that particular blight. That memory fueled a fierce resolve in her now. She would not be helpless again. She would not stand by while a threat loomed over the people, flawed as they were, who were her only family. "It's not just your risk," Elara said, meeting Lyraan's gaze steadily. "I brought you here. I helped you. My blood flows in you, Lyraan. Our paths are entwined, whether we wished it or not. Lyraan's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise. You understand more than I gave you credit for, Elara. What will you do? Elara pressed. If they find you, weakened as you still are? Lyraan was silent for a long moment. I will fight, or I will run, as my kind have always done. Elara thought of the subtle lessons, the heightened senses, the fluid movement. Lyraan had given her tools. Tools she had never asked for, never expected to need. A bold, terrifying idea began to form in her mind. Let me help you, Elara said, the words surprising even herself. Lyraan looked skeptical. How, Elara? You are human. Their weapons, their methods, you are vulnerable. You taught me, Elara countered. You taught me to see, to hear, to move differently. You said my blood was potent. What does that mean? Lyraan hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. It means there is something in your lineage, Elara. Something ancient. Your capacity for healing is more than simple knowledge. Your vitality is unusual. My kind can sense such things. It is why your blood did not merely sustain me, but aided my healing in a way others would not have. Elara absorbed this, a new layer of mystery added to her already complex life. Her parents, the sickness, her mother's healing gifts, was there more to her past than she knew? But that was a question for another time. The present danger was paramount. Then use it, Elara urged. Use what is in me.
Use what you have taught me.
Tell me how I can help you escape, help you hide. I know this land better than they do. I can move unseen. I can distract. I can mislead. Lyraan studied Elara's face in the dim light, reading the determination there. A slow, calculating look entered her eyes. Your courage is unexpected, little healer, Lyraan murmured. But recklessness can be fatal. Standing by and doing nothing feels more fatal, Elara replied. Lyraan considered, the ancient mind weighing the risks and possibilities. Elara's knowledge of the terrain, her ability to blend in, her connection to the village, these were assets Lyraan, as an outsider, lacked. And there was the inexplicable potency Lyraan sensed in Elara, a potential she didn't fully understand. Very well, Lyraan finally conceded, her voice low. If you are truly willing to face this danger, I will tell you what I know, and I will teach you more.
But you must understand, Elara.
This path is dark. It will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. You will have to make choices no human should ever face. Elara nodded, her heart pounding, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration surging through her. She had chosen. She was no longer just the quiet healer, bound by the predictable rhythms of village life. She was now a secret keeper, a co-conspirator, bound to an ancient being and an ancient conflict. The lessons intensified rapidly. Lyraan, pushing past her remaining weakness, focused on practical application. She taught Elara how to identify the telltale signs of the Order's presence, specific sigils carved into trees, disturbed patterns of wildlife, the scent of their strange elixirs. She taught her how to move through the woods not just silently, but intelligently, using terrain and shadow to her advantage, how to mask her own scent, how to read the intentions of others in their posture and movement. It was a crash course in survival, in the hunter's art, taught by the hunted. Flashback. Elara saw herself studying her mother's worn book of remedies, the careful, precise strokes of the pressed leaves, the comforting predictability of healing. Now her education was in disruption, deception, the art of disappearance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, the healer, was learning to walk the path of those who brought harm. This transition, from gentle nurturer to potential operative in a dangerous game, was the true transformational pivot. It wasn't just about physical skills, it was about a fundamental shift in identity, driven by necessity and her deepening connection to Lyraan. The quiet girl who healed scraped knees and fevers was learning to fight for lives in a way she had never conceived. The hunters were coming, and Elara was preparing to meet them, not with poultices and tinctures, but with sharpened senses, silent steps, and a courage forged in the heart of a forbidden bond. The root cellar, once a place of desperate refuge, had become their training ground, the crucible where the village healer was being reforged into something else entirely. The air grew taut, vibrating with the unspoken threat. The signs Lyraan had pointed out became more frequent, more obvious even to Elara's still developing senses. Disturbed earth near the eastern trails, faint, acrid smells clinging to the air near the valley's entrance, villagers speaking in hushed tones about strangers asking too many questions. The hunters were not just near, they were actively probing, tightening the net around Oakhaven. Lyraan, despite her improved strength, remained hidden in the root cellar, a necessary precaution. Emerging now would be catastrophic. Their communication relied on brief, hushed meetings under the cover of darkness, Elara relaying information from the village, Lyraan offering analysis and strategy. The village itself was tense. The inherent caution towards outsiders deepened into suspicion. Elara felt their wary eyes on her, noticing her longer absences, the subtle change in her demeanor, a new intensity in her gaze, a readiness in her posture that hadn't been there before. They didn't know her secret, but they sensed a change, a pull towards something outside their known world. This period was one of agonizing waiting and frantic preparation. Elara practiced the skills Lyraan taught her, honing her ability to move unseen through the forest at night, identifying optimal hiding spots, learning to differentiate between the sounds of the forest and the sounds of intrusion. Lyraan shared what she knew of the Order, their typical numbers in a search party, their hierarchy, their relentless focus. They were not simple thugs. They were trained, disciplined, driven by a fervent belief in their mission to cleanse the world of creatures like Lyraan. Their ruthlessness was legendary. Flashback. Elara remembered the Harvest Festival, the one time the entire village gathered, sharing food and stories, a rare moment of true community. She had stood slightly apart, watching, feeling the warmth but also the faint boundary that always separated her. Now, that boundary felt like a chasm, her secret placing her on the other side entirely. Yet, the memory of that shared humanity, that sense of belonging she yearned for, fueled her determination to protect them. The growing pressure from the Order also began to fracture the village's cautious tolerance of Elara. Elder Maeve confronted her directly one evening, her voice low but firm.
Elara.
There are troubling rumors. Strangers ask about peculiar things. And your behavior, you are withdrawn. You wander the woods at night. What are you hiding? Elara met Maeve's gaze, her heart pounding. She couldn't tell her the truth. It would cause panic, potentially expose Lyraan. I am searching for specific herbs, Elder. Elara lied, the falsehood feeling heavy on her tongue. A new poultice for the joint pain that troubles many. Maeve's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Be careful, child. The woods are not safe. And secrets have a way of tearing things apart. The warning was clear. The village's cautious acceptance was conditional. Elara felt the isolation deepen. She was alone in this, responsible for a secret that could shatter her world. Lyraan, sensing Elara's distress during one of their clandestine meetings, spoke of the burden of secrets. We who live in the shadows learn that secrets are both shield and cage, Elara. They protect us, but they also isolate us. You bear this alone, because you must. But remember why you bear it. I bear it for you, Elara said softly, then added, and for them. For Oakhaven. Lyraan was silent for a moment, a flicker of something akin to respect in her ancient eyes. A rare burden for a human, she murmured. To care for both the wolf and the flock. The metaphor struck Elara. She was caught between two worlds, two sets of needs, two identities. The healer who protected her flock, and the protector who sheltered the wolf. Lyraan began to share more about the prophecy. It was fragmented, ancient lore, half myth and half history among her people. It spoke of a time of great upheaval, of the balance between worlds being disrupted, and of a key being held by a being of unusual vitality, one whose blood held a unique resonance. It was vague, open to interpretation, but Lyraan believed it somehow connected to Elara, to the inexplicable potency of her blood. My kind have sought this for centuries, Lyraan explained one night, her voice low. A way to shift the balance, to emerge from the shadows, or perhaps to prevent utter annihilation. Some believe this prophesied blood is a weapon, others a bridge, others still a sacrifice. This was the open loop Lyraan had hinted at, the larger context for their collision. Elara wasn't just a random human who had stumbled upon a wounded vampire. There was something about her lineage that was significant. It was a terrifying thought, adding another layer of complexity to her life, another reason the Order might be seeking her. Flashback. Elara saw the small wooden bird her mother had given her, carved with intricate patterns. She wore it on a cord around her neck now, a simple token that suddenly felt imbued with forgotten meaning. Was it connected to her lineage, to this ancient vitality Lyraan spoke of? The prophecy remained a mystery, a dark star guiding their actions. Lyraan didn't have all the answers. The lore was scattered, fragmented by centuries of persecution and hiding. But the implication was clear. Elara was more than she knew. Her connection to Lyraan wasn't just an accident of mercy. It was perhaps destiny, or something like it. The waiting game couldn't last forever. The tension in Oakhaven reached a breaking point. One afternoon, a small group of figures clad in dark, practical clothing entered the village openly. They carried no weapons overtly, but their hands rested easily near hidden hilts. They were the Order, led by a man with cold, gray eyes and an air of quiet authority, the antagonist Elara had unconsciously dreaded. He introduced himself as Commander Valerius, here on behalf of the Order, seeking information about unusual occurrences. His gaze swept over the villagers, assessing, intimidating. Elara, watching from the edge of the crowd, felt a chill that went deeper than fear. Valerius's eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second too long, a subtle acknowledgement that sent a jolt of pure terror through her. Had he sensed something? Did he know? He spoke with a calm, polite menace, asking about strangers, about disruptions, his questions weaving a net of suspicion. He mentioned whispers of a shadow creature sighted in the area, a term that made the villagers exchange fearful glances. He was setting a trap. He was waiting for someone to slip, to show fear, to betray knowledge. The climax was approaching. The confrontation wasn't just about Elara helping Lyraan anymore. It was about Elara's identity, her lineage, the prophecy, and the fate of Oakhaven caught in the crossfire. The quiet valley was about to become a battleground, and Elara, the gentle healer turned reluctant warrior, stood at its heart. The presence of Commander Valerius and his people in Oakhaven was a suffocating weight. They moved through the village with an unsettling blend of polite inquiry and veiled threat, their eyes missing nothing. Elara felt their gazes on her constantly, probing, assessing. She maintained her facade, tending to a villager's sprained ankle, gathering herbs, performing the mundane tasks of her life, but every nerve ending was screaming. She could hear the subtle shift in their breathing when she passed, feel the predatory stillness that surrounded them. They weren't just looking, they were hunting. Valerius himself was a chilling presence. He spoke little, but his silence was more intimidating than any shout. His gray eyes seemed to pierce through appearances, searching for the hidden truth. Elara avoided direct contact, her heart hammering whenever he was near. She knew he suspected something. He was playing a waiting game, allowing the pressure to build, hoping for a mistake. Lyraan, hidden in the root cellar, felt the increased tension keenly. Their clandestine meetings became even more urgent, more focused. "They're looking for specific signs, Elara," Lyraan explained in a low whisper, her voice tinged with ancient weariness. "Traces of my passing, of my blood, or of the blood that healed me. Your blood." The implication was stark. They were looking for her, or rather, for what she represented. The prophecy. The potential Lyraan had sensed. This was no longer just about hiding a single vampire. It was about a larger, older conflict centered, impossibly, around her. "They may try to isolate you," Lyraan warned. "To question you away from the others. They're skilled at finding pressure points, exploiting weaknesses." Elara nodded, a cold dread settling in her stomach. her isolation in the village, the very thing that had made her life quiet and predictable, now made her a vulnerable target. Lyraan began teaching her rudimentary self-defense, focusing on speed, evasion, and exploiting an opponent's blind spots, using her knowledge of the human form and its weaknesses. It felt jarring, learning to disable when her life's work was to mend. But necessity was a harsh teacher. The climax ignited suddenly, violently. It was dusk, the time when shadows lengthen and the boundary between worlds feels thin. Elara was returning from the root cellar, having discussed a desperate plan with Lyraan. Lyraan would attempt a dangerous escape through the western mountains, using the cover of night, while Elara would create a diversion near the eastern ridge, drawing the hunters away. It was risky, fraught with peril, but their best chance. As Elara neared the edge of the village, a figure emerged from the deepening shadows of the large grain store, Valerius. He stood blocking her path, his expression unreadable. "Elara," he said, his voice quiet, calm, yet holding the weight of a drawn blade. "We need to talk." Elara's heart leaped into her throat, but Lyraan's lessons kicked in. Read the posture. Find the escape route.
Control your breathing.
Valerius stood relaxed, but his hands were subtly positioned, his weight balanced. There were other shadows moving behind him, unseen but sensed. They were cornering her. "About what, Commander?" Elara asked, keeping her voice steady, striving for polite ignorance. "About what you know," Valerius replied, taking a slow step towards her. "About the anomaly we track. We have reason to believe it passed this way, and that you were involved." He didn't have proof, not yet. Only suspicion. Elara's mind raced. Deny everything. Feign ignorance. But he was too close, too certain. A gust of wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees. Elara remembered Lyraan's words. Asterisk, use the environment. Blur your edges. Asterisk, I am just the village healer, Elara said, taking a small step back, positioning herself closer to the tangle of bushes beside the path. I know nothing of anomalies or tracking. Valerius smiled then, a cold, humorless expression that sent a shiver down her spine. Your heart rate tells a different story, child. Your scent, it carries traces we recognize. He reached out a hand, not to grasp, but a testing movement. That was the signal. From the shadows behind him, two other figures emerged, moving to flank her. Elara didn't hesitate. She dropped the basket she was carrying, sending herbs scattering, a momentary distraction. She spun, not towards the village, but towards the dense undergrowth, towards the darkness she had learned to navigate. Stop her. Valerius's voice cut through the air, no longer calm. The hunters reacted instantly, surging forward. Elara darted into the bushes, her body moving with an agility she hadn't known she possessed. She used the rough terrain, the low-hanging branches, the thorny vines Lyraan had taught her to turn to her advantage. She wasn't just running. She was evading, blurring her form, using the environment as a shield. She moves like it taught her. She heard one of the hunters yell behind her. The chase was on. This wasn't the quiet, intellectual confrontation Elara had feared. It was visceral, terrifying, a desperate flight for survival. She could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind her, their heavy boots clumsy compared to her light, practiced steps. She used the knowledge Lyraan had given her, identifying the points where they would be momentarily slowed, darting through narrower gaps, doubling back slightly to force them to recalculate. Flashback. Elara saw herself as a child playing hide-and-seek in these same woods, her small body easily concealed. Now, the stakes were life and death, and her childhood playground had become a deadly maze. She felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and potent, heightening her senses further. She could feel the vibrations of their footsteps through the earth, hear their ragged breaths, even sense the direction of their intent. Valerius was not among the immediate pursuers. He was coordinating, anticipating. She had to shake these off before he cornered her himself. She spotted a small, fast-flowing stream Lyraan had shown her, one whose uneven bed made pursuit difficult. With a desperate burst of speed, She plunged into the cold water, scrambling across. She heard shouts of frustration from the bank behind her. She didn't stop, using the stream bed as a path for a short distance before scrambling back onto the bank further downstream, deeper into the woods, heading towards the eastern ridge as planned. She was the bait. She had to draw them away from Lyraan, away from Oakhaven. The sound of her pursuers faded slightly as they were forced to navigate the stream. But the hunt was far from over. She could still sense their presence, a dark cloud moving through the forest. She was testing the limits of her newfound abilities, pushing her body and her senses beyond anything she had thought possible. The quiet healer was running for her life, using the very skills taught by the creature she had saved, fighting not with strength, but with evasion, knowledge, and a desperate will to survive. The true test had begun, pitting her fragile, human courage against the relentless power of an ancient, determined enemy. She had made her choice beneath the ancient oak in the rain, and now the consequences were chasing her through the dark woods. The chase through the night-cloaked forest was a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Elara ran, using every lesson Lyraan had imparted. She moved with a fluidity that felt almost unnatural, her body finding paths through the dense undergrowth she wouldn't have noticed before. She used the terrain, the shadows, the sounds of the forest itself to her advantage, weaving a complex, unpredictable path towards the eastern ridge. She could hear the hunters behind her, their movements less refined, more forceful, sometimes stumbling in their haste. But they were relentless, driven by a cold, professional determination. They communicated in low calls, coordinating their movements. She was alone, relying only on her senses, her training, and a desperate hope that Lyraan was using this diversion to make her escape. Flashback. She remembered a day collecting berries with her mother, learning which plants offered concealment, which paths were easiest to move through unseen. Her mother's gentle wisdom now felt like ancient knowledge, guiding her through this terrifying dance of predator and prey. She was no longer the child hiding, but a woman fighting for more than just her own life. As she climbed the eastern ridge, the terrain grew steeper, more challenging. This was intentional. Lyraan had identified this area as a potential bottleneck, a place where a smaller, faster target could gain an advantage over a larger, pursuing force. Elara scrambled up the rocky slope, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her muscles burning. Below her, she could hear the hunters struggling with the incline. She risked a quick glance back. She saw the beams of their lanterns sweeping through the trees, heard their frustrated shouts. She was gaining distance. But gaining distance wasn't enough. She had to lose them entirely, or draw them into a trap. Lyraan had spoken of ancient knowledge embedded in the land itself, of places where the veil between realms was thin, or where certain energies converged. While Elara didn't fully understand the mystical implications, Lyraan had identified a specific cluster of standing stones on the ridge, rumored to possess strange properties, as a potential point of disruption. A place where the hunter's senses might be confused, where their ability to track might be momentarily broken. It was a desperate gamble. Elara reached the ridgeline, the wind whipping around her, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. She could see the standing stones ahead, dark monoliths silhouetted against the bruised pre-dawn sky. They stood in a rough circle, their surfaces covered in ancient, eroded carvings. A faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from them. She pushed herself towards them, her legs aching, her lungs burning. She reached the center of the circle of stones and sank to her knees, utterly exhausted. She could still hear the hunters below, closer now, spurred on by the sight of the ridge line. They knew she was cornered. But she wasn't cornered. She was standing on a precipice of the unknown, banking on a hope fueled by ancient lore and her inexplicable connection to the creature who had revealed it to her. She focused, trying to recall everything Lyraan had said about this place, about disrupting their senses, about becoming truly unseen. It wasn't just about physical hiding. It was about something deeper, something that resonated with the strange potency of her own blood. She closed her eyes, drawing on the adrenaline that still coursed through her, trying to feel the energy Lyraan had spoken of, the subtle power humming beneath the earth. She focused on her own presence, trying to make it a less. To blur her edges, not just physically, but on some fundamental level that their trained senses would struggle to perceive. It felt abstract, impossible, yet she poured every ounce of her will into it. She felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity, building around her, emanating from the stones, from the earth, perhaps from herself. She held her breath, listening. The sounds of the hunters were closer now, right at the base of the ridge. She could hear Valerius's voice, calm and directing, telling his team to spread out, to sweep the ridge. She could almost feel their eyes searching, scanning. She concentrated harder, focusing on the tingling energy, willing herself to fade into the background, to become part of the wind, the stones, the fading night. And then she heard it. Confusion in the hunters' voices. Which way did she go? I lost the trail. The scent, it's gone? Valerius's voice, sharp with frustration.
Impossible.
She must be here. Spread out. Search. Elara remained absolutely still, barely daring to breathe. She could hear them moving around the ridge, their frustration growing. They were close, so close, but they weren't finding her. The standing stones, or the energy Elara had tapped into, or perhaps a combination of both, were working. She had disrupted their hunt. It was a fragile reprieve, a momentary victory bought with desperation and a leap of faith into the unknown. She stayed there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the sounds of the increasingly frustrated search below. Gradually, the sounds began to recede. Valerius, perhaps sensing the futility of a blind search in the darkness, was pulling his immediate team back, likely to regroup, to rethink. The immediate danger had passed, deflected by an ancient place and a fragile, newfound ability. But it was not over. Elara knew they wouldn't give up. They had seen her. They knew she was connected to what they hunted. She was a loose end they would need to tie up. Flashback. She saw Lyraan's face in the dim light of the root cellar, her amber eyes serious. This path is dark, Elara. It will test you. Lyraan was right. This single act of mercy had not led her to a simple rescue, but into a complex, dangerous world of ancient conflicts and hidden abilities. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Elara pushed herself up, her body stiff and sore, but her spirit strangely resolute. She had survived. She had used the knowledge, the training, and something deeper within herself to evade a formidable enemy. She was no longer just the healer who mended physical wounds. She was a survivor, a shadow walker, someone capable of navigating the dangerous spaces between worlds. The air on the ridge was cold, but it felt clean, invigorating. Below, the valley of Oakhaven lay quiet and undisturbed, unaware of the silent battle that had just been fought on the ridge protecting it. Elara looked towards the western mountains, hoping Lyraan had made it, hoping her sacrifice of peace and anonymity had bought Lyraan's freedom. The price of her mercy was becoming clear. Her old life was gone, shattered by the collision with the hidden world. But in its place, something new, something stronger, was emerging. She was no longer just Elara of Oakhaven. She was something more, something shaped by rain and blood and ancient secrets. The sun rose, washing the ridge in golden light, but the sense of relief Elara felt was tempered by the cold reality of her situation. She had evaded the immediate threat, but the Order knew she was involved. They knew she was a variable, potentially connected to the anomaly they sought. She couldn't return to Oakhaven openly, not immediately. Her presence would draw them back, putting the village at risk again. She spent the day hidden on the ridge, moving cautiously, observing. She saw the Order's patrols sweeping the lower slopes, their movements systematic and thorough. Valerius was efficient. They wouldn't stop searching until they understood what had happened and who Elara was. She ate the sparse provisions she had managed to grab before fleeing, the taste of dried fruit and hard bread strangely comforting in its normalcy. But nothing else felt normal. Her senses were still heightened, every sound amplified, every scent distinct. The forest felt alive in a way she had never experienced before, a complex web of life and energy. This was Lyraan's legacy, a permanent alteration of her perception. As dusk approached, she made a decision. She couldn't stay on the exposed ridge indefinitely, and she couldn't risk going back to the village. She had to rely on the skills Lyraan had taught her to survive on her own, in the wilderness that was now both refuge and potential trap. She began moving west, deeper into the forest, away from Oakhaven, following the general direction Lyraan might have taken towards the mountains. It was a solitary journey, the silence of the woods amplifying her isolation. She missed the quiet routines of her cottage, the simple comfort of her own bed, the familiar, if distant, presence of her neighbors. But she also felt a strange sense of liberation, a shedding of the constraints that had always held her in Oakhaven. She was no longer defined solely by her role as village healer or by her orphan status. She was Elara, the one who had faced down fear and found a hidden strength. Over the next few days and nights, she lived like a creature of the woods, moving by night, finding shelter by day. She used her knowledge of herbs to find edible plants and medicinal aid for the scrapes and bruises she acquired. She used Lyraan's lessons to move silently, to hide effectively, to conserve her energy. Flashback. She remembered Lyraan's voice in the root cellar, speaking of the deep wilds as her true home. Elara was now venturing into that world, guided by the echoes of Lyraan's words. It was challenging, exhausting, but with each successful evasion of a passing patrol, each night she found safe shelter, her confidence grew. She was not helpless. She was capable. She was resilient. She began to understand the true nature of the transformation Lyraan had initiated. It wasn't just about gaining new skills. It was about shedding the limitations she had placed upon herself, recognizing a potential she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer defined by her past, by the village's cautious tolerance, or even solely by her act of mercy. She was forging a new identity, one shaped by survival, by ancient knowledge, and by the strange, deep connection she shared with a creature of the night. During her solitary journey, she often thought of Lyraan. Had she made it? Was she safe? The bond forged by blood and shared secrets felt like an invisible thread connecting them across the miles. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, Elara felt a strange resonance, a sense of another presence, distant but distinct, like an echo in her soul. She didn't know if it was real or just her imagination, a product of loneliness and wishful thinking. But it was a comfort nonetheless. She also pondered Lyraan's words about her blood, about her lineage, about the prophecy. Was she truly connected to something ancient and significant? Was her mother's healing gift, her father's unknown past, part of a larger story? The small wooden bird her mother had given her, still tucked safely in her pocket, felt more significant now than ever. It was a symbol of her past, yes, but perhaps also a key to understanding her future. The prophecy remained an open loop, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. She didn't have the answers, but she had a newfound determination to find them. Her journey wasn't just about escaping the Order. It was about discovering who she truly was and what role she was meant to play in the larger world Lyraan had revealed to her. She thought of Oakhaven, wondering if the Order had returned, if the villagers were safe. She hoped her diversion had been enough. She hoped they wouldn't suffer for her choices. The bittersweet nature of her journey became clear. Her growth, her survival, came at the cost of her old life, her connection to the only home she had ever known. She was stronger, yes, but also more alone. Yet the hope remained. The hope that she could use her new abilities, her understanding of the hidden world, not just for her own survival, but perhaps, eventually, to protect others. To bridge the gap between the world of light and the world of shadows. To find a way to live, not just hidden away, but as something resilient, something powerful, something that honored both the gentle healer she had been and the capable survivor she was becoming. The eastern ridge faded behind her, a silent witness to her transformation. Ahead lay the unknown, the deep wilds, the mountains where Lyraan might have fled. And somewhere out there, the secrets of her past, and the promise of the prophecy waited. Her journey had just begun. Elara's journey through the wild was a relentless teacher. Each dawn brought a need to find new, secure hiding places, each night a challenge to navigate unfamiliar terrain while remaining undetected. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, sharpening her senses further. She learned to read the subtlest signs in the environment, the way animal trails intersected, the quality of the soil indicating water sources, the type of canopy providing the best concealment from aerial observation. This wasn't just survival, it was integration. She was becoming a part of the landscape, blurring the lines between herself and the natural world, exactly as Lyraan had instructed. Flashback. She saw her small cottage garden, neat rows of herbs, the comforting predictability of growth and harvest. Now, the entire forest was her garden, untamed, unpredictable, demanding constant vigilance and adaptation. The contrast highlighted the vast distance she had traveled, not just physically, but internally. She thought of the villagers sometimes, of their simple fears and familiar routines. It felt like a lifetime ago. Had they given up searching for her? Did they believe she was lost? Or something worse? The isolation was profound, a heavy silence broken only by the sounds of the wild. Yet, within that silence, Elara found a strange kind of peace. Stripped of the expectations and cautious judgments of Oakhaven, she was free to simply be, to test her limits, to discover her true capabilities. She wasn't just the orphaned healer anymore. She was the one who could disappear into the shadows, the one whose senses perceived more than the visible world, the one whose blood held an ancient potency. Lyraan's words about her lineage, about the prophecy, echoed in her mind. She yearned to understand. Who were her parents, truly? What was this ancient power in her blood? Was her mother's healing gift a manifestation of it? She had always believed her mother was simply a skilled herbalist, wise in the ways of nature's remedies. But what if there was more? What if her lineage was not just human, or held a hidden, powerful connection to the world Lyraan inhabited? The symbolic wooden bird, worn smooth with handling, became her anchor to the past and a key to the future. It was a token of her mother's love, but perhaps also a clue, a symbol whose true meaning was yet to be revealed. She traced the intricate carvings on its surface, wondering if they held a message, a forgotten language. She had to find answers. And she suspected the answers lay not back in Oakhaven, but further into the hidden world, perhaps among others like Lyraan, or within the remnants of ancient lore that the Order sought to control. Her journey shifted purpose. It was no longer just flight, it was a quest. She was searching for understanding, for the truth about her own identity and her place in the prophecy Lyraan had mentioned. She began subtly seeking out signs of other paths, other presences in the wild, not hunters but perhaps something else, something older. She looked for symbols, for markers that might indicate the passage of beings who understood the deeper mysteries of the world. She found them, eventually. Subtle signs etched into the bark of ancient trees, patterns of stones laid out in forgotten clearings, faint whispers carried on the wind that sounded like names in a language she didn't know, yet felt strangely familiar. These were markers left by creatures of the hidden world, a silent language weaving through the forest. She followed these faint trails, a human stepping cautiously into a realm she was only beginning to comprehend, guided by instinct and the strange resonance within her blood. She encountered other beings of the wild, not the mundane animals she was used to, but creatures touched by magic or ancient lineage. She saw swift, luminous forms darting through the twilight, heard calls that resonated deep in her bones, felt the presence of ancient sentinels hidden within the oldest trees. It was a world both beautiful and terrifying, a world of power and mystery. And she, the simple village healer, was walking through it, no longer an outsider, but someone whose blood, whose lineage, seemed to grant her a hesitant, unspoken acceptance. She realized that Lyraan hadn't just taught her to survive in the wild. Lyraan had opened her eyes to the wildness within herself. The quiet healer had always felt a deep connection to nature, to the cycles of life and death, to the earth's quiet power. Now, she understood that connection was more than just empathy. It was lineage. It was a resonance with the hidden currents of the world. She was no longer just Elara, the orphaned girl tolerated by a cautious village. She was Elara, whose blood hummed with ancient vitality, whose senses were attuned to the unseen, whose path was intertwined with prophecy and shadows. The denouement was unfolding not as a sudden end, but as a quiet emergence. She wasn't fully transformed yet. The process was ongoing, a continuous shedding of the old and embracing of the new. But she had accepted her new reality. She was a bridge between worlds, a human connected to the ancient, and her journey was now about understanding the full implications of that connection. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with known and unknown dangers, but for the first time in her life, Elara felt a sense of purpose that transcended simple survival. She was searching for answers, for understanding, for her place in the unfolding story. And she was no longer afraid to step into the shadows to find it. The forest was vast, the secrets were deep, and the village healer, now a creature of resilience and mystery, walked onward, ready to face whatever the hidden world held. Her journey continued, a solitary exploration of the liminal spaces Lyraan had hinted at. She followed the subtle signs, the whispers on the wind, the carvings on ancient stones, piecing together a fragmented map of a hidden world woven alongside her own. She learned to hunt sparingly, to find sustenance in the wild, her connection to nature deepening with every sunrise and sunset she witnessed from her hidden vantage points. The physical hardship was immense, but it paled in comparison to the internal journey. She was shedding layers of ingrained human fear, prejudice, and limited perception. She was learning to trust instincts she hadn't known she possessed, to rely on senses that transcended the mundane. She felt a profound sense of connection to the ancient forests, to the flowing rivers, to the very earth beneath her feet, a connection Lyraan had awakened within her. Flashback. She saw the wary faces of the Oakhaven villagers, their fear of the unknown, their clinging to tradition. While she understood their need for safety, she now saw it also as a form of blindness, a refusal to acknowledge the complex, interconnected reality of the world. She loved them, in her own way, but she knew she could never truly belong there again. Not as she was now. She missed the quiet predictability of her healing work, the tangible comfort of easing pain and mending broken bones. But her purpose had expanded. She was no longer just a healer of the physical body. She was a healer of boundaries, a potential bridge between worlds that had been kept separate for too long. The prophecy continued to be a driving force. Lyraan's belief that Elara's blood, her lineage, held a key to shifting the balance between realms was a heavy weight, but also a source of profound significance. She understood now that her act of mercy wasn't just about saving a single life. It was potentially about influencing the fate of entire species, both human and those that dwelled in the shadows. She encountered glimpses of the Order again, their presence a stark, unwelcome reminder of the danger that still hunted her. They were methodical, persistent, their search fanning out across the region. But Elara was more adept at evading them now, blending into the environment, using her heightened senses to anticipate their movements. She was no longer just running. She was navigating their presence, a shadow dancing on the edge of their perception. Flashback. She saw Valerius's cold, assessing eyes, his calm menace. She knew he represented a powerful force driven by dogma and a desire for control. They would never understand her choice, her connection to Lyraan. To them, she was an anomaly, a threat to the established order. One evening, perched high in a tree overlooking a hidden valley, Elara saw a sight that stopped her breath. Gathered in a moonlit clearing were figures that moved with a silent grace, their forms indistinct in the low light, but emanating a power that resonated with the energy Lyraan possessed. They were Lyraan's people, not the monsters of legend, but beings of ancient dignity and sorrow. She watched from a distance, hesitant to reveal herself. Were they Lyraan's allies, or others who might see her as a risk or a resource to be exploited? She had learned caution in the wild. She observed their interactions, the subtle nuances of their body language. They spoke in low tones, their voices carrying on the still air. Elara couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the weight of their conversation, the sense of shared purpose, of deep-seated weariness. She saw one figure step slightly apart from the others, looking out towards the distant peaks, towards the direction Lyraan might have taken. There was a palpable sense of longing, of waiting. Could that be Lyraan? Or someone waiting for her return? She felt a pull, a desire to reveal herself, to seek answers, to potentially find Lyraan. But fear held her back. She was still just a human, however changed, stepping into a world she barely understood. Her human vulnerability was a stark contrast to their ancient strength. She decided to wait, to observe, to choose her moment carefully. This encounter solidified her purpose. She wasn't alone in this hidden world. There were others. And if she could find Lyraan, if she could understand the prophecy, perhaps they could find a way to navigate the growing conflict with the Order. The denouement wasn't just about Elara finding herself. It was about her finding her place in the larger narrative, connecting with the world Lyraan belonged to, and facing the challenges that lay ahead together, or perhaps alongside, the beings who shared Lyraan's ancient heritage. The image of the figures in the moonlit clearing, ancient and mysterious, stayed with her, a beacon in the darkness. Her journey of transformation was leading her towards a destiny intertwined with these beings, with the prophecy, and with the one who had first shown her the path, Lyraan. The quiet healer was now standing on the threshold of an ancient world, ready to step across. Weeks turned into months. Elara continued her journey through the vast, untamed wilderness, guided by the subtle signs and her increasingly acute intuition. She learned to track the movements of the hidden people she had glimpsed, following trails that were invisible to the untrained eye, reading markers left on stones and trees. She was becoming a creature of the borderlands, existing in the space between the human world and the ancient realm of Lyraan's kind. Her body grew leaner, stronger, her movements more fluid and silent than she could have ever imagined in her previous life. Her senses were so sharp that she could anticipate changes in the weather hours in advance, hear the quiet stirring of creatures miles away, and even sense the emotional states of those around her, a skill Lyraan had hinted at but hadn't fully explained. This was the potency Lyraan had spoken of, the unusual vitality and sensitivity of her lineage manifesting in ways she was only beginning to understand. Flashback. She saw herself as a child, often feeling overwhelmed by the world, by the emotions of others, retreating into herself. Now, that sensitivity was a tool, a way to connect with the world and its inhabitants, both seen and unseen. She realized her healing ability wasn't just about herbs and remedies. It was about an innate attunement to life force itself, a deeper connection to the flow of energy. She still thought of Oakhaven, but the sharp ache of homesickness had softened into a quiet nostalgia. It was the place where she had been shaped, where her journey began, but it was no longer her destination. Her path lay elsewhere, in the heart of the mysteries that now defined her. She continued to see signs of the Order's presence, their patrols extending further into the wilderness. They were relentless, their resources vast. The threat was ever-present, a dark cloud on the horizon. But now, instead of simply fleeing, Elara found herself observing them, studying their tactics, their patterns. She was learning to anticipate them, to use their predictability against them. Flashback. She saw Valerius again, his cold eyes. He represented the forces that sought to control, to eradicate anything they deemed outside their understanding. They were driven by fear and a rigid worldview. This strengthened Elara's resolve. She believed in a different way, a way of coexistence, of understanding, of finding balance. Her journey was no longer just about survival or personal discovery. It was about embodying that different way, becoming a living testament to the possibility of connection between worlds. One evening, while seeking shelter in a hidden cave, Elara found a symbol carved into the rock face, a stylized wing intertwined with a spiraling vine. It was a symbol she had seen hinted at in other places, a recurring motif among the signs left by Lyraan's kind. And it resonated with something deep within her, a feeling of familiarity she couldn't explain. As she traced the carving with her fingers, she felt that strange, static-like energy again, stronger this time. It flowed into her, warm and tingling. She closed her eyes, focusing on the feeling, trying to understand. And then, a name formed in her mind, clear and distinct, like a memory surfacing from deep water. Aethelgard. It wasn't a name she had ever heard, yet it felt like a name of power, connected to the symbol, to her lineage, to the prophecy. Was this a name of her ancestors? A name associated with the ancient vitality in her blood? The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just connected to this world, she was from it, in some forgotten way. Her lineage wasn't just human, it held a tie to this hidden realm, to the very prophecy Lyraan had spoken of. The wooden bird, the healing gift, the potent blood, it all clicked into place, forming a clearer picture of a hidden heritage she had never known. This was the heart of the mystery, the missing piece of her identity. She was a bridge not just by choice, but by birthright. This knowledge was both empowering and terrifying. It explained the Order's relentless pursuit, the significance of her blood, Lyraan's initial surprise. She wasn't just Elara of Oakhaven, she was Elara, daughter of a forgotten lineage, her very existence a key to ancient powers and potential upheaval. The prophecy wasn't just about a key, it was about her being the key. Flashback. She saw her parents' faces again, clearer this time, no longer just blurred memories. Were they aware of their heritage? Had they hidden it to protect her? The questions were manifold, pushing her further on her quest for understanding. Her isolation didn't feel so profound now. She was connected to something vast and ancient, to a history that stretched back further than the oldest trees in the forest. She wasn't just wandering. She was walking a path laid out for her by generations past, a path leading towards her destiny. She continued west, her pace now driven by a fierce urgency. She needed to find Lyraan, to understand this heritage, to learn how to wield the power that flowed in her veins, not just for survival, but for purpose. The denouement was evolving from quiet acceptance to active pursuit. Elara was no longer just surviving, she was seeking, claiming her identity, preparing to face the inevitable confrontation with the Order armed with the knowledge of who and what she truly was. The village healer had been reborn as a woman of ancient lineage, ready to step out of the shadows and into the heart of the prophecy that awaited her. Elara's journey led her higher into the mountains, the air growing colder, the landscape more stark and challenging. The forest gave way to rocky slopes and hidden valleys, a harsh but beautiful realm where the wind sang through the crags and the silence was broken only by the cry of mountain predators. She continued to find the subtle signs of the hidden people, confirming she was moving in the right direction. The signs grew more frequent, more distinct, indicating she was nearing a gathering place, perhaps even a sanctuary. And with the increasing signs of the hidden, came increasing signs of the hunters. The Order's patrols were bolder here, their presence a stain on the pristine wilderness. They were also tracking the same signs Elara was following, closing in. The confrontation felt inevitable, a storm gathering on the mountain peaks. Elara felt a different kind of tension now, not just fear for her own safety, but a fierce protective instinct for the hidden people she was seeking and for Lyraan, who she hoped was among them. They were being hunted in their own territory, and she, the human with the ancient blood, felt compelled to stand with them. Flashback. She saw herself in Oakhaven, protecting the village from a blight, her focus solely on the well-being of her people. That same core drive was still there, but its scope had widened immeasurably. She was fighting for something larger than herself, larger than one village. She finally reached a vast, high valley nestled between towering peaks, a place of breathtaking, desolate beauty. And there, gathered in a sheltered cove, were the hidden people. There were more of them than she had glimpsed before, figures of ancient grace and power, moving with a silent, almost ethereal presence. And among them, standing slightly apart, her silhouette unmistakable against the mountain stone, was Lyraan. She looked weaker than when Elara had last seen her, but alive. A wave of relief, so potent it made Elara's knees tremble, washed over her. Lyraan had survived, and she had led Elara here. Elara descended into the valley, moving slowly, openly, no longer trying to hide. She was human, yes, but her presence resonated with the ancient energy of this place, with the lineage she had discovered. As she neared the gathering, the hidden people turned towards her, their movements halting, their ancient eyes assessing. There was surprise, curiosity, and a flicker of caution in their gazes. Lyraan turned, and her amber eyes met Elara's. A slow smile, one of genuine warmth and relief, spread across Lyraan's face. She stepped forward, moving with a quiet dignity. "Elara," Lyraan said, her voice carrying clearly on the mountain air. "You came. You led me," Elara replied softly. "Your signs. And I needed to understand." She reached the edge of the gathering. Lyraan introduced her to others, elders whose faces held the weight of centuries, younger ones whose eyes shone with a fierce, wary energy. They regarded Elara with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Lyraan explained Elara's act of mercy, the bond they shared, and the strange potency of Elara's blood. There were murmurs, hushed whispers of the prophecy, of Aethelgard, the name Elara had discovered resonating in the air. The hidden people, Lyraan's clan, were aware of the ancient lineage tied to that name, a lineage believed to be a link between their world and another, perhaps even with the human world. They saw in Elara the potential embodiment of that link, the physical manifestation of the prophecy. Just as Elara was beginning to feel a tentative acceptance among them, a low, guttural alarm sounded from one of the mountain peaks. A scout's warning.
Danger.
The air grew cold, heavy with the scent of metal and determination. The order. They had found the valley. Panic rippled through the hidden people, but Lyraan and the elders moved quickly, issuing calm, decisive orders. They were preparing to defend their sanctuary. Valerius and his forces appeared on the ridge overlooking the valley, a dark line against the sky. He paused, surveying the scene below, the gathering of the hidden people, and Elara standing among them, a lone human figure. His eyes locked onto Elara, and his expression shifted from cold focus to sharp, predatory recognition. He knew. He didn't just see a human collaborator, he saw what she was or what she represented.
The key.
The prophecy. The climax was upon them. The confrontation was not just between the Order and the hidden people. It was centered on Elara, the nexus point of ancient conflict and future possibilities. Elara felt the power thrumming through her veins, the ancient vitality Lyraan had spoken of, intensified by the energy of the valley and the presence of the hidden people. She was no longer the fearful girl who stumbled through the woods in the rain. She was Elara, Aethelgard, the bridge between worlds, the one whose blood held the key. She looked at Lyraan, at the faces of the hidden people, at the approaching threat on the ridge. Her choice was clear. She wasn't running anymore. She stood tall, her gaze meeting Valerius's across the valley, her posture radiating a quiet, fierce resolve that surprised even herself. The healer was ready to fight, not with weapons, but with the power of her lineage, the knowledge she had gained, and the strength of the impossible bond she shared. The fate of the hidden valley, perhaps even the balance between realms, hung in the balance. The battle erupted, a clash between ancient power and cold steel, between those who lived on the fringes and those who sought to impose order with ruthless efficiency. The Order descended into the valley, moving in disciplined formations, their weapons humming with contained energy. The hidden people met them with a fluid, almost ethereal resistance, their movements blurring, their forms shifting, using the terrain to their advantage. Elara found herself in the heart of the conflict, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant. She didn't possess the supernatural strength or speed of Lyraan's kind, nor the advanced weaponry of the Order. But she had her healing knowledge, her heightened senses, her agility, and the strange, resonant energy that pulsed within her. She moved through the chaotic fray, her focus sharp, her mind clear. She used her knowledge of anatomy to strike at vulnerable points, her agility to evade attackers, her senses to anticipate movements. She was a blur of motion, a human ghost dancing on the edge of the battle. She saw Lyraan fighting, a whirlwind of speed and grace, her ancient power unleashed against the hunters. She was formidable, but the order was numerous and prepared. Elara saw one of the hidden people fall, struck down by an energy weapon. Instinct took over. She rushed to their side, ignoring the danger, drawing on her healer's training. She placed her hands on the wound, focusing the strange energy within her, willing it to mend. It was different from healing with herbs. It was a direct flow of life force, potent and focused. The wound began to close, slowly at first, then faster, the hidden person's ragged breaths evening out. A gasp went through the hidden people nearby. They had seen her heal, not with remedies, but with something innate, something powerful. This was the potential of Aethelgard lineage, manifesting in the heat of battle. Valerius saw it too, his gray eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Elara. He knew she was the key, the source of potential disruption. He began to move towards her, cutting a path through the fighting with deadly precision. Elara saw him coming, a figure of grim determination. This was the confrontation she had anticipated, the moment where she would face the embodiment of the force that had hunted her, that sought to control the hidden world. Lyraan intercepted Valerius, their powers colliding in a burst of displaced air and crackling energy. Lyraan was weaker from her previous injuries and her struggle to reach the valley, but her ancient power was still immense. Their fight was a terrifying dance of shadow and light, speed and force. Elara continued her work, moving among the wounded hidden people, offering her healing touch, using the potent energy that flowed from her. Each act of healing drained her, but also reinforced her purpose. This was her fight.
This was how she contributed.
As Lyraan and Valerius battled, a hidden hunter, unseen in the chaos, took aim at Lyraan. Elara saw it, her senses screaming a warning. Without thinking, she launched herself forward, tackling the hunter, knocking their aim wide. The shot went harmlessly into the mountain stone, but it left Elara exposed. Valerius, momentarily disengaged from Lyraan, saw his opportunity. He moved towards Elara with terrifying speed, his hand reaching for her. Lyraan cried out a warning, but she was too far. Elara braced herself, her innate energy surging. She wasn't just a healer anymore. She was Aethelgard. As Valerius reached her, Elara focused the energy within her, not for healing, but for projection. She pushed it outwards, a raw wave of life force and ancient power aimed directly at Valerius. He recoiled, surprised by the invisible impact, stumbled back, his face a mask of shock and pain. It wasn't a physical blow, but a disruption of his being, a clash of fundamental energies. Lyraan seized the moment, pressing her advantage, forcing Valerius further back. The tide of battle seemed to shift, the hidden people, emboldened by Elara's actions and the disruption of their leader, fighting with renewed ferocity. The confrontation reached a fever pitch. The hidden people fought for their home, the order for control, and Elara fought for the fragile connection she had found, for the possibility of a different future. The valley echoed with the sounds of battle, a dramatic, violent culmination of her journey. Elara, the village healer, was standing in the heart of it, a key to ancient power, a bridge between worlds, her choices having unleashed a force that would change everything. The battle in the high valley was fierce, leaving scars on the ancient landscape and on the souls of those who fought. The Order, though disciplined and well-armed, was ultimately unprepared for the combined resistance of the hidden people defending their home and the unexpected power wielded by Elara. They were forced to retreat, their ranks thinned, Valerius himself visibly shaken by the encounter with Elara's lineage-fueled energy. They withdrew, leaving behind their fallen and a palpable sense of thwarted purpose. They would not forget. They would return. But for now, the valley was safe. The hidden people gathered their wounded, tending to them with quiet reverence. Elara moved among them, offering her healing touch, her energy depleted, but her spirit resolute. Her ability to mend with pure life force was astonishing to them, a living manifestation of the prophecy they had only known in lore. Lyraan came to her side, her ancient eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion, gratitude, and wonder. Aethelgard, Lyraan murmured, using the name Elara had discovered. It sounded different on Lyraan's tongue. Not just a name, but a title, a recognition of power and lineage.
You have saved us, Elara. More than just in this battle. You are the key. You are the bridge.
Elara felt the weight of those words. The prophecy was real. Her lineage was real. And it meant her life would never again be simple, would never return to the quiet rhythms of Oakhaven. This was her destiny, forged in an act of mercy and tempered by fire. The hidden people, who had initially regarded her with wary caution, now looked at her with awe and respect. She was not just a human who had helped them. She was one of them, in a way they hadn't understood until now. She was the fulfillment of ancient whispers, the connection they had lost. Flashback. She saw herself alone in her cottage, a quiet orphan, her connection to the world feeling tenuous. Now, she stood among beings of ancient power, recognized, accepted, their future intertwined with hers. The isolation was gone, replaced by a profound sense of belonging, a connection deeper than any she had ever known. Lyraan explained more about the Aethelgard lineage, fragmented pieces of lore that spoke of guardians, of peacekeepers between realms, of a time when the lines between worlds were less defined. It was a heritage of responsibility, of balance, a counterpoint to the Order's drive for separation and control. Elara's healing gift, her attunement to life, was not just skill. It was an inherent part of this lineage, a manifestation of its purpose, to nurture, to connect, to bridge. The bittersweet reality was that her connection to Oakhaven, to her human life, was irrevocably altered. She could not return there and endangered them. But her journey had led her to a new home, a new purpose among the hidden people who were now her kin, not by blood in the human sense, but by lineage, by shared history, and by the prophecy that bound them. The denouement was not an ending, but a new beginning. Elara chose to stay in the hidden valley, to learn more about her heritage, to understand the full extent of her abilities, to become the bridge her lineage intended her to be. She trained with Lyraan and the elders, honing her control over the energy within her, learning to wield it not just for healing, but for protection, for insight, for weaving the threads between realms. She was still Elara, the healer, but now she was also Elara, the Aethelgard, the guardian, the one whose improbable act of mercy had not only saved a life but had revealed an ancient prophecy and her own true identity. The future was uncertain. The Order was still out there, smarting from their defeat, determined to understand and control the power they had encountered. The balance between worlds was still fragile. But Elara faced it with a quiet strength, a sense of purpose that illuminated the path ahead. She had stepped out of the shadows, not into the blinding light of conventional heroism, but into the twilight realm of ancient power and responsibility. The prophecy of love and ruin. Perhaps the love was the impossible bond she shared with Lyraan and the hidden people, the ruin the potential consequences if she failed. But there was also hope. Hope that she could be the one to mend the broken connections, to find a way for different worlds to coexist. Her story began with a simple act of mercy in the rain, a moment of human compassion offered to a creature of legend. It had led her down a path of fear, discovery, and transformation, revealing a hidden world and a hidden destiny. And now, standing tall in the ancient valley, the village healer was ready to embrace her future, whatever it might hold, her heart filled with the quiet strength of acceptance and the unwavering light of hope. If you found yourself drawn into Elara's incredible journey, If you believe that courage can be found in the most unexpected places and that one act of kindness can change the course of destiny, leave a like and subscribe. What ancient powers lie dormant within each of us, waiting for the moment to be awakened?